Hello people of the internet, welcome back. In this video I'm going to be talking kind of about something that I see a lot and I think is a very common kind of idea among especially older people, but kind of why things are changing in the way they're changing and why it's not necessarily a bad thing. So I received a comment and it was by kind of an older lady, I think, from her profile picture and her name and the way the comment sounded. It sounded like it was an older lady. And it was kind of along the lines of like everyone's got a label these days, you know, you look normal, you talk normally, how are you autistic? Like that's back when I was younger, autistic meant like you'd live in, and I quote, the mental retardation ward, and wouldn't be able to speak and wouldn't be able to be socialised in normal society. I mean, the way she worded it wasn't like mean, it was just kind of, obviously she didn't really understand, probably thought she was being complimentary, like, but you know, you're amazing, you're pretty, you can't you look normal, you know, you can't have anything wrong with you, why would you say that about yourself? There's also kind of an idea, I think, that like, oh, parents just, if they've got a child that's naughty, they don't want it blamed on them, so they get them diagnosed with like something so it doesn't look like it's their fault. Like, oh, you've got a child that's a bit weird and odd, so let's just get them diagnosed with autism. Or we've got a child that's doing really badly in school, so let's just get them diagnosed with dyslexia. We've got a child that's really annoying and won't sit still. Let's diagnose them with ADHD, just to kind of, so people don't judge them for them having a naughty child. I'm going to explore kind of why that's not really the case, and you know, how these labels can actually be a positive thing. So this video does have a bit of a vague structure, but it's probably going to go off on a bit of a tangent. So first I'm going to go into the kind of the neurodiversity movement, which I think neurodiversity has become a bit of a buzzword these days, but I think a lot of people don't really understand what it is. It's not about glorifying being mentally ill or anything like that. It's just recognising the differences in how people's brains work and not necessarily seeing that as a negative, just optimising things for how people work differently. So it kind of recognises that things like autism spectrum disorder and ADHD are normal variations among humankind. They just happen. It's not a disease, it's just normal. And that things that are considered a diagnosable disorder, things are usually quite culturally based. Like if you think about it, dyslexia wouldn't be a thing in cultures that don't use written language. Like it was not going to be a thing. Historically, when people kind of lived in small family groups and travelled around, autistic spectrum disorder, like the social deficits in that wouldn't really have been an issue because you'd only be socialising with the same 5 people the whole time. So these are things that are quite culturally based in, to a certain degree. Obviously there is, you know, there are things about these neurodivergencies that wouldn't necessarily be a positive in any society, but a lot of it is cultural. And historically, a lot of people are like, oh well, when I was younger, no one had Asperger's syndrome. I'm using that because that's kind of what I was diagnosed with but now obviously it's not obvious, but the diagnostic criteria has kind of changed, and now autism spectrum disorder is just one condition, and then they no longer divide it up into like Asperger's syndrome and classical autism. But I was diagnosed with Asperger's syndrome, and I think when people say like autism, they mean people like me that are verbal, have, you know, appropriate verbal skills for their age, and are don't have learning disabilities. They mean people like me. We didn't have people like that when I was younger. No one had ADHD when I was younger. They did. It's just that wasn't the word people had for it. The word that would be used would be odd or weird or not all there. You know, stupid maybe. Just a bit. Yeah, it would be. People would still realise something was kind of different about them, but it just wouldn't have had the vocabulary that we had for it now. And yeah. And the thing is, I know I seem very normal and you wouldn't notice anything different about me on camera, but if you interacted with me in real life for any extended period of time, you would probably notice that I am a bit odd. There are a few things that are kind of different about the way that I interact with people, and just kind of live my life, and those things can't be like trained out of me. I got diagnosed when I was quite young. So I got diagnosed with Asperger's syndrome when I was 10 years old, and that was because the school, one of my teachers at school noticed that she thought I was on the autism spectrum. My parents didn't really know about this at the time because they didn't, you know, even though it wasn't that long ago in the grand scheme of things, there wasn't that much awareness for what Asperger's syndrome was, or the fact that girls could have it. Like, it wasn't really talked about that much. So the school suggested that I get assessed, and I did, and I had it. But the fact that I have a name for that, and I know what it is about me that's different from other people, it allows me to optimize strategies for living my life. And 50 years ago, I 100%, maybe not 50 years ago, 60 years ago, 70, 100 years ago, I would 100% have not ended up in a good situation in my life because of my autistic traits. I would have probably ended up in an abusive marriage where I was just being taken advantage of, or I would have had a nervous breakdown and would have been put in some sort of institution, or I would have ended up the kind of funny alcoholic woman that lives in a shack down the road. And yeah, I can't see a way that if I was living a long time ago, I would have, not even that long ago, like within living memory, where I would have had a good, successful life. And the fact that I have received a lot of support for my autistic spectrum disorder, I have had I've had so many more opportunities than I would have had if there was no awareness or recognition of it. For example, I'm at university at the moment, and I've been able to complete my first year so far, and I've done very well. I've got firsts in everything, but I had a lot of support to do that. I have had, you know, people, not like necessarily, I haven't had anything where it's given me like an unfair advantage, but it's helping get myself organised, making sure I know what I'm supposed to be doing every day, and just that I got to come in like a few days early going to the university. All the students on the autism spectrum got to come in like early start and kind of get a tour around the campus and meet other students who are similar to them and get kind of settled in before other people start arriving. That made such a difference to me. And I meet up with people every week that help me get organised and understand stuff. And I get a bit of extra time in exams. And it makes a huge difference. Honestly, like, I wouldn't have been able to do it if I didn't have that support. And I think, while obviously the benefit to me is obvious, the benefit to society is huge as well, because not just me, like, I'm not that special, but like the whole like population of the of the country who are on the autistic spectrum, who have opportunities, are able to contribute when otherwise they wouldn't be able to without the support. That kind of net number of people contributing, it's like 1 to 2% of the population. Like, it's quite a lot of people contributing who otherwise would struggle. That makes a huge difference to society as a whole. And these things are still underdiagnosed. People still kind of get written off. I read something, and it was about how many people in prisons actually have undiagnosed autism and mild learning disabilities, or intellectual disabilities that haven't been recognised before. And you know, a lot of people who are autistic struggle to fit in and end up being kind of easily led and getting pulled into things that they wouldn't necessarily. And if they don't have other opportunities, it's understandable that people end up going into crime and doing bad things because they've not had that support. And maybe if they had support growing up, then they wouldn't have ended up in prisons, which I can imagine is only a huge positive to society. You don't want people who have a lot to offer just going down a bad path and getting locked up. Like, I feel like that's not an improvement. They're like, oh, well, everyone just had to muddle through. Like, everyone just had to suck it up and get on with it when we were younger. It's like, well, yeah, some people probably did manage to just suck it up and push through and have a normal career and a normal job and a normal life, despite having undiagnosed autism or ADHD or something. But a lot of people probably didn't. Like, a lot of people didn't. I'm sure a lot of people who were in institutions or alcoholics or in prison back then, like, it was because they didn't have that support, and they wouldn't have ended up like that if they had that support. Obviously, you can't prove like what would have happened if something else. You can't prove these sort of things, but I highly suspect. I would be very surprised if that never happened. So yeah, and it still happens now. It's underdiagnosed. There are people in prisons and stuff, and of course, the people who are most behind in diagnosis and recognition are people like who are, the traditionally more marginalised groups, women, people of ethnic minorities, people of low socio-economic background, those people who are traditionally kind of behind in opportunities in a lot of ways. Also, it comes with diagnosis of neurodivergent conditions, I guess. So yeah, we've got a long way to go with those sort of things. And I think another thing that is important to kind of explain is the medical versus social model of disability. I've often had people say to me, like, there's nothing wrong with you. There's nothing wrong with you. You're just different. Like, you're great. And I'm like, I never said there was anything wrong with me. There's nothing wrong with me. I'm I'm not that amazing, but like I'm fine. There's nothing. Both in case people don't know, I'm deaf as well. Um, you know, people are quite like, but you're still like living a good life. Like it's not a disability. You have a good life, and it's like, well, but having some sort of diagnosed condition or neurodivergency, having something diagnosed, a diagnosis, isn't necessarily a bad thing. I think a lot of people think of diagnosis as like of diseases like cancer. Like having cancer is never going to be a good thing, um, but being deaf, it's not an illness. I'm not going to die from being deaf or from being autistic. I just I'm just different. So that's kind of the medical model of disability is the something's wrong with you, like the condition is the problem. And people are like, why would you want to get diagnosed as having like something wrong with you? Like just hide it. Don't tell people. Like you can hide it. You speak so clearly, like no one would know you're deaf, so just don't tell them that you're deaf. Um, because it's a bad thing. You need to keep it hush hush. It's like back in the day where if you were gay or something, it was like hide it. You don't want people to know because you don't want them to think you're a weirdo. When it's like, but that's not a bad thing. It's just a thing. Like, and the social model of disability is that disability is more it's just a normal variation among a population. Like you can't have a population of a million people and none of them have a disability unless you've got some sort of like, you know, euthanasia program for anyone that doesn't fit the norm. If you have a big population, you're going to have people that fall outside the norms in various ways. And that what is considered disabling and what is disabling in a way that restricts some of your opportunities and your abilities is hugely cultural. Like in a different culture where capitalism wasn't really a thing, people who accumulate vast sums of wealth that they could never possibly use, that could be considered a disorder, like some form of like monetary hoarding disorder, like I don't know, like money accumulation syndrome or something, and they'd be diagnosed with that, and that would be considered like a condition that they needed, treatment for and help letting go of some of their money to help other people because it's unfair. Like that's quite it's a culture thing. Like I said earlier, like if in a society where they don't use written language, dyslexia wouldn't really be a thing, because no one reads, and that it should be accommodated. Like the way the environment should change to support the inevitable amount of people in a society that would have a disability. So, for example, you need to have ramps because some people are in wheelchairs. You need to have hearing loops so people who have hearing loss can connect their hearing aids or cochlear implants. You need to have sign language interpreters available. You need to have all of these things, including accommodations for things like autism spectrum disorder, ADHD, that sort of thing. Like a lot of supermarkets now, I think things are improving. A lot of supermarkets now have like a quiet hour. So people who are either autistic or just don't like loud noises and whatever, which is completely normal, can have that time to go to the supermarket where they don't have to deal with like music and bright lights and stuff, which is going to benefit a lot of people. So, leading on for that, like how it could benefit a lot of people, where do I think society should be heading? Obviously, I have no power to change anything, and I'm not the pinnacle of, like, I don't I don't know what I'm talking about, basically. But this is, some things that I think we should be working on as a society. I think we should be promoting accommodations and healthy work environments for everyone. So whether you have a disability or a condition or neurodivergency or not, I think everyone should be able to ask for accommodations. And I'm not talking about they don't have to be huge things. I'm just talking about oh, can I have a desk by a window, please? Or can I sit somewhere quiet? Or that sort of thing. Or, some people who need to be around people, they're like, can you just not lock me in a little office somewhere? I want to be, with other people. Of course, I think everyone should be able to ask for things like that. And as long as it's not, really, really difficult for a company to provide, moving desks around and stuff, there's no reason they shouldn't do it. Yeah, I think everyone should be able to ask for things like that. I think we should remove the stigma against certain career paths and have more opportunities for people who don't suit traditional roles. There seems to be a hierarchy of academia is at the top. So if you are a doctor, a lawyer, teacher, those things are considered the good jobs. Then you've kind of got your manual labour traditional manly roles, where you've got your kind of electricians and plumbers and that sort of things. Those go in the slot a bit lower. Then you've got your and small business owners as well are kind of somewhere in that somewhere in those tiers, and then depending on how big your small business is, depends on whether you're in the academia tier or the traditional manly role level. And then you've got the traditional womanly roles, which is, carers and cleaners and, caterers, where you're kind of, there's, and then at the bottom you've got the kind of, I don't know, whatever, everything else, I think there's a lot of obviously that's real huge generalisation. I'm not saying that this is how everything works for everyone. But yeah, there should be more kind of opportunities for people that don't suit traditional roles. There shouldn't be a hierarchy in what jobs are considered good and what jobs are not. It's just as long as you're kind and useful, then who cares? There should be less emphasis on academic subjects in schools and more emphasis on life skills in education. For example, I think there should be classes on how to read employment contracts and how to make beds and how to, cook food and how to... all these, money management and that sort of stuff. That should all be taught in schools, because all it does is provides an unfair advantage to kids who get that from home, or the kids that are pretty good at figuring that sort of stuff out on their own, which does kind of discriminate against people who are on the autistic spectrum or ADHD or anything else, who aren't going to figure that stuff out very easily. I need instructions for everything. I think we should have more flexible work schedules, and I think we should normalise a 4-day week. I think that you should have kind of 2 days on, 1 day off, 2 days on, and then 2 days off. I think that's how it should work. But I think that should be flexible. If someone wants to work, at particular times, they just want to do mornings every day and then not afternoons at all, or whatever. I think more flexibility. I think the 9 to 5 work week is is very dated and doesn't suit most people. I think there should be mandatory accessibility in public spaces, and that includes not only things like, can someone physically get into the space, but is that space a pleasant environment for most people? So I think they should prioritise things like lighting, which isn't just helpful for autistic people, but also people with visual impairments. Good lighting, and just everyone. Like, who wants to be someone with really bad lighting? I think acoustics, so like noise dampening acoustic panels on walls so things are less echoey. Obviously, that benefits people with hearing impairments and sensory processing issues, but it also just benefits everyone. Like, who wants to be in some awful, like, echoey big building? Like, maybe some people do, but I don't. And I think we should work on acceptance of differences and awareness, and not in like a these specific things are okay, but just like in a you know, some people have autism, some people have two mums, more in like a general, like a everyone's different, and even if it's not that specific scenario you've never seen or heard of before, then you still accept them within reason, obviously. Like, if you're just like, yeah, I'm not preaching about like, yeah, accept murdering as a hobby because some people like that. Like, I'm not saying that, but you know, have a bit of acceptance, and not in like a, oh, today's, you know, LGBT awareness week, so now we're gonna just basically tell you don't bully gay people, and that's it, and that's the end, that's your education. It's like, you know what, more about a culture, building a culture of acceptance, and having greater social supports and financial safety nets to reduce inequality, for people who are less able to keep up with a huge work schedule or from less privileged backgrounds. I just don't think there's any real downside to having some degree of safety nets. I don't think homelessness should really be a problem in like first world countries. Actually, no, the term first world is super, like, don't like that term. If you look up the origins of like first world, second world, third world, they're a bit odd. They don't mean what you think they mean. I want to go into a big tirade about that, but I'm not going to. Yeah, so support in countries that can afford to have social safety nets for people should 100% have them. If you've got multi-squillionaires running around, you should... I don't think there should be people living on the street. I think that's just wrong. But what do I know? I got a D in my sociology AS, so maybe I'm not the person to be taking this from. But I hope you've enjoyed this video and maybe learned something useful from it. If you have any more points to make, please leave them in the comments. Yeah, thank you for watching. Bye!